All right, guys, gals, what is up? I wanted to apologize for the late upload. I normally try to do Tuesday, Thursday. Yesterday I had a pretty big time crunch, and so wasn't able to get it on time. But that's more opportunity to go into the weekend knowing a bit more about today's lesson. You can use it in your day-to-day life. And as soon as I start talking, the dog starts moving in the background. But yeah, let's get into it. So we were talking about strategy in U.S. foreign policy. So the history and definition of strategy, how it's different than tactics, components of strategy. So there's your objectives filtered by your resources, um, and how that affects your goals. And then modern U.S. strategy and its limitations. So uh, what that is a great segue into is today's lesson, which is threat. So for threat, we're going to go very quickly over what we mean by threat, what it looks like in war, although we've talked about that quite a bit, so we're not going to dwell on that too long. Economic threat, specifically sanctions and their processes, and then the utility of threat, or how states, mainly the United States, uses threat in foreign policy processes. So for threat, we're going to go very quickly over what we mean by threat, what it looks like in war, although we've talked about that quite a bit, so we're not going to dwell on that too long. Economic threat, specifically sanctions and their processes, and then the utility of threat, or how states, mainly the United States, uses threat in foreign policy processes. So going over the definition of threat, a threat is a stated intention to harm. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean something physical. What it means is do X or I'm going to do Y. It can be physical. If you take your ship through the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to shoot it with a Shahed drone. That's a threat. But it can also be something not physical. If you don't turn in your final exam, I'm going to give you a 0. Something like that. And that's opposed to a warning, which is more passive. If you don't do X, Y is going to happen. Not saying who's going to do it, but it's going to happen. And of course, it's reversible too. If you do X, Y is going to happen. If you smoke several packs of cigarettes a day for years, you are, well, it's not guaranteed, but you're more likely to get lung cancer. If you drink alcohol like a fish every day for years, you're more likely to develop liver cirrhosis. If you, that's all health advice, but it goes to poli-sci too. If you alienate your allies, they're less likely to back you up when you need them. And during the last lecture, we talked about how a lot of the Cold War was posturing and threat. This was because of mutually assured destruction. Obviously, the United States and the Soviet Union don't actually want to use the nuclear weapons because that's mutually assured destruction. It's right there. If they are using nuclear weapons, then everybody gets nuked. So the two alternatives they have are the domino strategy we talked about, where it's containing each other's influence, and then the other one, and so that's through like proxy wars, like Vietnam. And then the alternative is the only way to engage with the Soviet Union directly is to posture, so not actually shoot at each other, but to, I believe as the kids say, flex on some fools. Yeah, I don't know if you remember the metaphor, but it's the two guys who act like they're going to fight, but neither one of them wants to take the first shot. I do want to expand on the tribe of monkeys metaphor just a bit more. And by explain that, I mean explain sort of the natural or naturalistic reasons for threat. Because the fact is that within nature, um, it does make more sense on aggregate to give warnings and threats. Hey, if you come here, this dog is going to bite you. So it's baring its teeth here, because the dog actually doesn't want to attack. The dog is scared. Most animals are scared. There's an old saying, they're more afraid of you than you are of them. But they're processing their perceived danger in the only way they know how. So even, I don't know how y'all feel about Chihuahuas. I can't stand the things. Like, I love dogs, but I can't stand Chihuahuas. But Chihuahuas aren't, well, Chihuahuas might be the exception to this, but most dogs aren't spiteful or evil or looking out to destroy anything. It's just expensive to commit to an attack, and so it's better to avoid war if you can by using threat. If that sounds similar to Sun Tzu and the Art of War, so the ancient Chinese text, we talked about how it's actually about avoiding war. That's another great example of threat within nature and then within ancient China. And it doesn't even have to be aggressive either. Peacocks famously, I mean, it's a verb to mean to show off. He's peacocking. But the alternative or the alternate use of their big feathers is to look like it has a ton of eyes, so predators don't really know what to focus on. So it's a very passive threat or warning, since animals can't really ascribe intent. It goes off the logic that the best type of weapon is the one you don't have to fire. I tried to find who originally said that, but it keeps linking back to Iron Man, the 2008 movie. Hey, 2008 mentioned again. But the logic is still sound. The best type of weapon is the type you don't have to fire, and that saves you trouble and negotiates the conflict before anyone has to commit that many resources. Going back to the art of war, Sun Tzu, or Sun Tzu, as some people call him, uh, at the time, war was very highly ceremonial. The body counts are very low. It's mostly about posturing, about looking tough. Because who has time for it? I've got all these Confucian Analects to memorize. My wife and multiple concubines have some internal drama going on there. The court eunuchs might be conspiring against me. So in ancient China, who has time for war? Let's just flex our muscles and use threat as a way to negotiate. And it's not unique to ancient China either. You look at examples such as David and Goliath. Obviously, that's a fight, but it's negotiated heavily by threat. Or if you ever read the Iliad, where it's a lot of posturing and not actual fighting, or a lot of 1v1s in both cases. So, threat. Now, going out of how threat is used in war, turns out there's actually more to foreign policy than just war. Another big realm of it is economics. And so what we're going to talk about heavily today is sanctions. What that has to do with threat, we'll get to at the end. Sort of callback, we'll almost say. But what are sanctions? Well, economic sanctions are offensive economics, you can think of them as. So a way to get another state to do something, and it's offensive, it's not defensive. It's going out of your way to mess with another state's economy. And that's an economic penalty placed on a state by other states or a tariff or refusal to buy products from a state. So you can already probably think of some examples, but we'll get into it even more. So one of the biggest examples of sanctions going on right now is the Russian oil market. Now, Iran threw all of this into disarray, but before Iran and the whole Strait of Hormuz crisis, even before the invasion of Ukraine, we can look from these two charts. Russia and its economy are heavily dependent on its ability to export oil and natural gas. You can see here, it looks like it's 35.7%. So it's a huge part of the Russian economy. And it makes sense. Russia's a huge place. They got a lot of land to tap for oil. So it makes sense that they would build a lot of their economy around it. And it's, mostly wasteland. I apologize to any of my Russian students, but most Russians don't even want to live in most of Russia. So what else are they going to use it for? And of course, a lot of this is for export. So making money exporting oil to other countries. A big purchaser of that, 48% in 2020, was Europe. One of the biggest ones being Germany. You see Netherlands is up there too, but Germany is important because it also controls a lot of policy within the EU because it's such a high population, large country by European standards. And we've talked about how Kissinger had his quote about Germany. So to set all of this up, and what are we building toward, is a big chunk of the Russian economy depends on exporting oil to the European Union, especially Germany, but overall, the entire EU, big deal. Well, back in 2022, Russia decided to play a prank and surprise attack, well, not really surprise attack, but rapidly invade Ukraine. Illegal, unjustified war. It's still being bargained or resolved today. We talked about how Ukraine states between larger powers tend to get squeezed, or what we call them as buffer states. So Ukraine, great example of that happening, very consistent with IR theory. So I want you to put yourselves in the thought process of the United States or the EU. You can send aid, get directly involved. Well, there's different types of aid. So you could just send first aid, non-combat supplies, food, water. Second option, you can send weapons. Third options, you can send aid in the most literal sense, being boots on the ground, German soldiers, French soldiers, Spanish soldiers, fighting and dying for the territorial integrity of the Donbass region. And that's what going to war is. Includes bringing Ukraine into NATO and or enforcing a no-fly zone. Early on in the war, there was talk about the U.S. doing a no-fly zone over Ukraine because it sounds more passive than it is. It's just like, oh, well, the United States isn't going to allow anything other than U.S. jets to fly in Ukraine. The problem is that if Russia decides to call the bluff, then you have jets from a nuclear power, in this case the U.S., shooting jets from another nuclear power, Russia, and that doesn't end well. So the U.S. or the EU can also refuse to buy Russian oil to hurt their economy, and that would be sanctions. Something very adjacent to sanctions would be kick Russia from the global banking system. And then some of the more funny ones, ban Russian athletes from competitions, and then ban Russian cats from cat competitions. that'll show them. So military and non-military aid have been sent to Ukraine. Billions at this point. This number is way too low. This is just as of May 12th, so the first couple of months of the war. So all sent to Ukraine, not really meant to end it, but meant to reduce suffering. Other option, go to war with Russia. NATO didn't do it. The United States didn't do it, which is part of NATO, obviously. So, as we discussed, it's mainly because Russia's a nuclear power. But what's interesting is NATO mainly exists just to contain Russia. There's a big debate on after the Soviet Union fell in 1991, would NATO fall apart now that it doesn't have a purpose? And one political scientist, John Mearsheimer, said, well, basically said, when NATO doesn't have a purpose, it is going to fall apart. Soviet Union falls, NATO doesn't fall apart. John Mearsheimer is, despite being a Harvard professor, still sort of seen as a laughingstock because of his prediction. Then Russia invades Ukraine, validates NATO existing, and kind of saves Mearsheimer's reputation. I haven't met him, but I'm sure he would rather be wrong than have a war break out. But I'm sure we're all familiar with the massive amounts of military aid that have been sent to Ukraine. I believe RFK Jr.'s son even deployed, not as a U.S. military soldier, but as an independent, I think, Foreign Auxiliary Legion or something like that. So he fought in Ukraine's army against Russia. And that's not as uncommon as you would think. Early in World War II, before Pearl Harbor, a lot of pilots in the UK helping bomb Germany were actually Americans who had joined the Royal Air Force. So it's everything but having literal US boots on the ground. Of course, another big option is to refuse to buy Russian oil. So US, EU put sanctions on Russian oil. So even though the US is a net exporter of oil, because of the weird economics, we still import oil also. So refusal to buy Russian oil, you would think would hurt the Russian economy, and it does. But what it also does is it creates this dynamic of middlemen. The US still needs to import oil and export oil. So what country, what state do y'all think ends up stepping up to the plate to turn Russian oil into their oil? It's actually India most of the time. India made a ton of money just being a middleman for these sanctions, and it's called bypassing or bypassing sanctions. And the other thing that was done, well, one of the other things was kicking Russia out of the banking system, which created some very interesting effects. So if you've ever had to transfer money overseas, you've likely had to deal with the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. So the SWIFT. So it's called SWIFT for short. You can talk about SWIFT transactions and stuff like that. Obviously easy to remember because of the singer-songwriter. Does she still write songs? Someone send me an email, let me know if she's still a songwriter. But Taylor Swift. So SWIFT financial banking system, Russia was kicked out of it. It created this weird dynamic where Russia had plenty of money to service its debts. For those who don't know, basically all countries have tons of debt that they have to regularly service. U.S., of course, has a shocking amount, but it can just print its own money, so it's mostly fine, hopefully. And most states just do it that way, and it's just a inflationary. But Russia, in this scenario, has plenty of money to pay its debts, but still does not pay its debts because it's been kicked out of the banking system. They don't have any way to actually put the money in the accounts of the people they owe money to. So what happens? Well, what happens to you if you don't pay your debts? It hurts your credit score, right? Uh, Quick aside, after my credit score went above 800, I was so happy and then so depressed that that was considered a win. And this is just what adulthood is. But anyway, so Russia, most states, basically all states have some sort of credit score used to just like a personal credit score. And with Russia not paying its debts, its credit score went down. So Russia wanted to pay its debts, it was not able to. So it was, if you think of it as like a domino attack, then the next domino falling is Russia's credit score being lowered. Now, I know some of y'all, like me, are the age to buy a house, and hopefully everyone who wants a house is able to afford one. I know it's becoming difficult, but let's talk about interest rates. Well, one thing a low credit score can do is make you, well, it's a signal to any lender that you are a bigger risk. In this case, it's accurate, right? Russia was not able to pay debts. Lenders know it's a bigger risk. So to compensate for it, they hike interest rates on Russia. They don't have a choice. And you do not want a high interest rate. The difference between an 11% or 11.5, 7.5, and 3.93, just the mortgage payment by itself. So on the same house, same price, just different interest rates, the mortgage payments are about the same to run everything, but the overall lifetime of the loan is massively different. So when we talk about the price of the home you can afford, we're just talking about how much buying potential you have. So either $100,000 house, $142,000 house, or $210,000 house. So important to have a good credit score and low interest rates. Quick, sort of funny personal story. When my sister moved in with her boyfriend, they got a mortgage together. Um, Ill-advised if you're not married, but you can't tell your family anything. Uh, but they get a mortgage together, and then well, they're able to lock in the mortgage while interest rates are very low. This is like 2022, I think. There's a big delay in the house because they live in Florida and it's cheaper to build than to buy. Um, Within a week of moving in, the boyfriend tells my sister he wants to date other women while remaining in a relationship with her. And she does not approve of that. So within a week of moving in to their mortgage that they shared together, they break up. Sister moves back to our hometown, South Carolina, but has to get her name off the mortgage. Well, it had been so long and the market had shifted so much that interest rates got to be super high. So her now ex-boyfriend has to refinance a mortgage just he's living at and gets absolutely railroaded with high interest rates. And it's basically financially devastated him last I've checked. I don't really follow up enough. Yeah, so similar thing happened to Russia. I'm joking. But interest rates, super important. Another thing done to punish Russia for the invasion of Ukraine was banning Russian athletes from competing. This caused a lot of stink at the Winter Olympics because states that have been allegedly walking on eggshells right now, states that have allegedly been involved in war crimes were still allowed to compete in the Winter Olympics, but Russia was not. Russian athletes could compete, I believe, just as like unaffiliated with a country, or maybe Russia had stopped them. I didn't follow it. But when you look at the IOC website, they're pretty explicit that if you look at, yeah, the first paragraph here, it specifically mentions Ukraine, the specific parts of it invaded, so Russia being kicked out of the Olympics. And this also applied to the 2024 Olympics. But yeah, Russia, a lot of heat, especially from Ukrainians, and being punished because of the invasion of Ukraine. Where this gets interesting, though, is similar cases where states aren't banned from the Olympics. So if we're not going to talk about the one from the last Olympics, we can talk about 2004. So United States, of course, votes to invade Iraq in 2003. A year later, the Olympics are in Athens. And the thing is at the time, the invasion was quite popular. We've been over the Bush graph, the George W. Bush graph a million times. Mission accomplished and all that. But retrospectively, the invasion of Iraq has been far less popular than I think most people are willing to admit, especially internationally. We talked about how around this time, a lot of American students who were studying abroad would wear Canadian t-shirts and backpacks just to avoid being hassled by people from other countries for being American. So the IOC is willing to punish one state for invasion and not another. But then it gets into very, very, very muddy politics. And frankly, I don't have an opinion on it. It seems like it's punishing the athletes for stuff that's out of their control. That's my opinion, I guess. Speaking of the 2024 Olympics, this wasn't a case in the Winter Olympics, but one thing that was quite interesting, there was a news story going around that China had lied and said that they had actually gotten the most gold medals, and Chinese state media was just saying that China had won like 2 more gold medals or whatever, to look like they were the winners. And the United States actually won, of course, by the U.S. Medal count, the U.S. won 1 more gold medal than China did. So how can China make a lie like that? Or how can both states have such different opinions on who won if it's an international organization? And to be clear, Chinese media did not think of themselves as lying. But there's a little catch. Well, you've had a second to think about it, and if you said Taiwan, you are absolutely correct. Taiwan had won a few medals, and because China considers Taiwan part of China, the People's Republic of China, or Communist China, counted Taiwan's medals as their own, so by their count winning. But because the United States of America does not recognize Taiwan as part of the PRC, by the US's count, the US had won. So interesting little thing. Yeah, I don't want to talk about war constantly in this class. And we never talk about anything sporty. If you ever meet me in person, you're going to be like, oh, he's not an athlete, that's why. And then what I thought the funniest response to Ukraine was Russian cats banned from international cat competitions, specifically because of the Ukraine invasion. Um, Similar to the Olympic athletes, I don't know what the cat is supposed to do. Uh, and wasn't even Russian cats. It was historically Russian breeds of cats. Like my dog is an English Springer Spaniel, but if England acts up, I mean, my dog's never been to England, but he would still be banned if from dog competitions if England or English dogs were kicked out. But yeah, the Russian cats thing I thought was still so funny. And to be clear, Russian cats had actually participated in parts of the war. Uh, just not all the cats. I'm joking, of course. And where did tariffs come from? Well, you'll be probably not that surprised to know that, like most of U.S. foreign policy, it comes from the. I'm gonna let you think about it for a second. The president. So, president has the most ability to call for tariffs through the IEEPA or the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And so that would kick off most of what we see as tariffs. Kicking a state out of the international banking system, the US doesn't run that, the SWIFT system, it's an international organization. So that's less common. Of course, the US has a say in it as a member of SWIFT, but it has to be something more widely unpopular, like the invasion of Ukraine, to get kicked out of SWIFT. So what the sanctions actually look like, it's tariffs, embargoes, credit ratings, and then this is one people don't think of that much, but soft power, it's very difficult to measure. Um, but let's go into more detail, especially on tariffs, embargoes, and soft power, because we've talked about credit ratings enough. So what is a tariff? We especially heard this over the last year with what President Trump called Liberation Day, or all the tariffs he threw on all the different states, including that Penguin Island. But it's a tax imposed by a country on the goods and services imported from another country to influence it, raise revenues, or protect competitive advantages. Generally, it doesn't make sense to tariff, so it's artificially increasing prices to protect the home market, we'll say. And so what tariffs are doing is they're making it more expensive to bring stuff in. But if it's already in the United States, then it maintains some sort of competitive advantage, or its advantage is protected more. So imagine you want to ship a bunch of towels to the United States. Well, if you need to pay a tax on them when they're shipped in, then any domestic towel makers who don't have to pay the tax have an advantage and can either inflate the price, or if they're smart, they're going to undercut you. Um, and so, especially President Trump likes it because American labor costs so much more. It's a way to compensate for that. It's more expensive to produce towels in the United States, so you make importing towels in mainly from China and Vietnam more expensive. So all the United States towels, towel factories that we see all over the place, I'm being sarcastic, are protected. Tariffs really don't work though when there's no domestic industry to protect. So putting tariffs on stuff that cannot grow in the United States, um, or at least not grow enough to meet demand, uh, is really just artificially increasing the prices of stuff. If you had coffee this morning, if you had bananas, I believe bananas are the most purchased item at the grocery store. Um, but yeah, coffee, bananas. If you're going off buying a bushel of sugar cane, as one does in college. It's another joke. Um, there's no domestic industries or no major U.S. domestic coffee bean plantations, banana plantations, sugarcane plantations, because they can't grow in the U.S. So putting a tariff on that makes very little sense. 2018, I believe it was. No, it was 2017. Um, was the trade war between the United States and China, sort of the first one, we'll say. Of course, after the Liberation Day tariffs, this went up by like aggressive expansion, we'll say. But what happens is in a trade war is so the U.S. puts tariffs on Chinese goods, while China puts tariffs on U.S. goods as a punishment. So what Liberation Day was, well, we'll get into that, was a bunch of tariffs on different states that already had tariffs in the U.S. But because U.S. was raising tariffs with so many different states at once, a lot of them were raising their own tariffs all at once to damage the U.S. economy. So it ends up really just sort of being a wash a lot of the time. Protecting domestic industry, unless there's no domestic industry to protect. And it's also worth mentioning that it's protecting domestic industry at the cost of the average consumer because the prices are going up. Um, Another form of sanctions is embargo. Probably the most famous one is the U.S. embargo on Cuba. That has been going on for 66 years now. That's a long time. And we're going to get into some of the effects of that in a second, but it was to punish Cuba for becoming communist. We talked about the major rival states, Cuba being one of them. And then, of course, within Miami, and within Florida as a whole, there's a lot of Cuban refugees, or at this point, the children or grandchildren or great great grandchildren of Cuban refugees that don't want Cuba to be communist anymore. And that's such a big voting bloc in such an important state that a lot of presidents, especially, don't want to lift the embargo. Keep in mind, it was for being communist, but the U.S. has since then began trade relations with basically every other communist country in the world except North Korea. Well, I say that like that's a lot of countries, but aside from Cuba and North Korea, there's three: China, Vietnam, and Laos. But that's a big reason why Cuban cigars used to be very sought after. I don't know what it's like now. I quit smoking a long, long, long time ago. I tried smoking a cigar like 2 years ago, and I just coughed up a lung because I just can't handle it. I don't have any like sickness or anything. I'm just a wimp. Um, but I don't know if like between 18 and 21, that's what kids are still doing, is smoking Cuban cigars. It's a big deal if you could get one. When I had literally nothing else going on in my life at that age. But yeah, Cuban cigars still highly sought after, maybe. What's interesting though is that that runs the other way too. Cars are very expensive to ship, um, and in Cuba, it is often cheaper to keep repairing the cars that were there during or before the revolution than to import new cars, and they can't import cars from the United States. And for whatever reason, they can't bypass as well. So within Cuba, you see a lot of classic cars. I'm told, I've never been. What's funny though is my wife is not a U.S. citizen, so she could go to Cuba very easily. And then, yeah, as we talked about, credit scores having that effect and the importance of interest rates. I'm serious. Anyone who owns a home or a car, you know what I'm talking about. Do what you can to get a good credit score. And then there are soft power attacks, and that's non-military, non-economic power. Um, which business and trade is a weird thing to start that off with, but we'll expand on that. But then culture, education, governance, and diplomacy. So in a way, it's like your reputation or the cachet that your reputation carries, or in some cases doesn't carry. Uh, so what I mean by non-economic power, but soft power still being through business, is how elite you look when your company trades with a company from another state. So is the state seen as a mark of success to trade with? So is the state seen as a mark of success to trade with? People often brag about trade with Switzerland, Nordic states, known for their hyper luxury, not so much for the developing world. So here's a guy named Chris trading with a guy named, it looks like Ian. But everyone trades with China, so it's not elite. So China has its own advantages in soft power, but it's not seen as the same mark of success to be trading with China as it is, especially the Nordic countries. For those who don't know, Nordic countries kind of have a reputation in poli-sci as being sort of teachers' pets, goody two-shoes. So they're kind of popular to dunk on, but they can handle it. I think average happiness is way higher than the United States. Then there's soft power through culture. People want to emulate the culture of a state, and a state's cultural exports making the state look more popular. I saw on Twitter a few days ago, there was this, did not seem organic at all, push of Japanese people celebrating American culture. I think it was just an algorithm thing. But when I taught English in China, uh, high schoolers would have to focus on, are they going to study for the entrance exams to universities in the UK or universities in the United States. And the United States was often seen as a backup. One, because a lot of Chinese people think gun violence is a issue in America, and to be fair, it is. But then the other one is a lot of them, and I would ask the students, why do you want to study in England? And they would say, well, Harry Potter. And so I'd try to use that as a way to get them to learn some Latin so they could improve their vocabulary, but it didn't work out. And a lot of that is through movies and media. I think when people think like Japanese culture, one of the first things that comes up is anime. American culture, superheroes. Before that, it was a lot of police stuff and war on terror stuff, and then before that, I don't know, cowboy movies. The UK, when it's not Harry Potter, a lot of it's James Bond. And then with India, had this huge soft power win, I believe in 2008. I'm not going to find the slide right now, with Slumdog Millionaire. Beyond that, there's just is in like a very middle school way, is it cool to be associated with the country? And everyone has these sort of stigmas or stereotypes that come from soft power, right? So when you think Arab Gulf states, you think extravagant wealth. When you think of the EU, a lot of people think of the art scene. Of course, with Brazil, a lot of people default to Carnival and the big, colorful celebrations they have. Or it doesn't always have to be exciting stuff, or maybe you do find this exciting, but there's also places with religious significance, like Israel, or in this case, the Vatican City, which I have been to Vatican City. It's a nice place. Or sometimes it is just being a fan of a country, like anime nerds. That's me on the right. Hold on. Yeah, right, with Luigi in the background. Or in the city I lived in China, Qingdao, they have a huge beer culture because it used to be a German colony. So on the left, that is a German beer garden, and on the right, that's a Chinese beer garden in Qingdao. And you can probably see on the glass or whatever that beer dispenser is called. I don't actually know, but that's Qingdao brand beer. So the Germans colonized Qingdao and then immediately started brewing beer. So there's Germany soft power. Yeah, this is just sort of a fun fact. Qingdao beer you actually can buy in a bag, and they give you a plastic bag full of beer and a straw. So the most expensive part of a can of beer is the can, and it saves money. Um, that goes the other way though. Russian culture, very rich, very vibrant. I had a Russian roommate for a while, super nice guy. But Russia has a lot of negative stereotypes in the United States because the United States and Russia tend not to get along, and that affects Russia's soft power. China, wonderful place. I'd recommend anyone go visit China. It's a fantastic place. You have my issues with the government, of course, but the people there are some of the sweetest, most genuine people you'll ever meet. Chinese soft power. The average American's perception of China also not good, and it's not really always an effect of government policy. It's just, or not directly at least. But you think about what 40 years of every villain being a Russian guy. It makes sense that Russia it would affect Russian soft power. And if any of you are from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park area, so like Gatlinburg, um, Nevada, Florida, you know the importance of tourism. Um, well, because of the invasion of Ukraine, believe it or not, Russian tourism has dropped down, which is the big moneymaker for a lot of states. And of course, Japan kept going up until COVID hit. So, what are some of the effects of sanctions? Will they make people like their country more? So, if your country is getting sanctioned, you're actually going to be more loyal to it on average. Um, Incidentally, if you are sending sanctions, it makes your country, or it makes the leader who sent the sanctions look better. So, Biden giving sanctions to Russia in response to Ukraine made Biden look better domestically. But it makes Biden in the United States look weaker internationally. Sanctions are all you can do. And it hurts both the sender and receiver economically. We talked about, especially with tariffs, how it artificially increases the prices. I skipped ahead, but it makes the anyone who's willing to do a bypass, like what we talked about with India, and we'll go into more detail in a second, makes them more wealthy. But yeah, makes the receiver leader more popular. Rally around the flag effect. We talked about that with Pearl Harbor, 9/11. Of course, it's not as dramatic as an actual kinetic attack, but what happens is even if you don't like the president or the prime minister or emperor or whoever, if you find out you're getting sanctioned, you're going to be like, not you, but the average person is going to be like, well, we're in the same team. I might not like the emperor, cartel boss, whatever you want to do, but he's still our leader, and so it creates this rally around the flag effect most of the time. Every time it makes the sender more popular domestically. So every time Biden announced another round of sanctions on Russia, it helped him within the US polls and within a lot of the international community. It was sort of expected that he would do it. So among US allies, especially NATO allies, it made Biden look quite good. So it made both Biden and Putin more popular in their respective states, which is quite interesting. And yeah, there's a big pro-Putin rally in, well, I assume Russia. But yeah, so Biden and Putin becoming more popular off sanctions are a big reason why sanctions exist. Because as we are about to talk about, sanctions don't actually work in influencing policy after the fact. Now, one issue is it makes the sender look weaker internationally. The sender, so in this case, the United States, sending sanctions because they don't want to go to war. Okay, well, that's a signal to Russia that the United States doesn't want to go to war with Russia. So it makes the sending country's leadership look weaker to the rivals. So Biden sending sanctions makes Biden more popular in the United States, makes Biden more popular in NATO and American aligned countries. But if you're not American aligned, you're thinking, well, okay, it's going to cost me something to invade, but we can just bake that into the price when we calculate how much the invasion is going to cost. In the economic impact, sender and receiver's economies are hurt, bypassers' economies are helped. So we talked about this with the oil being bypassed through India, and of course, people within India making an absolute killing off of it by just slapping an Indian sticker or Indian flag on some oil. So what happens? What doesn't happen when sanctions are imposed is quite an interesting question, um, which can be answered by, well, a lot of things. It's a negative question. Um, but one of the most interesting things that doesn't happen is, well, the war's still going on. Um, it's still active, so the sanctions didn't work in preventing the war, and that's for a few reasons. They don't work and make things worse, but they're never going away. So to recap, I actually tricked you. Happy late April Fool's Day, I guess. We're talking about threat and sanctions. So it's the definition of threat, which is an if-then statement. If you do this, I'm going to do this. If you don't do this, I'm going to do this. So there's the threat of war being highly ceremonial, and still being highly ceremonial, even though we don't think of it that way. It's not necessarily a uh, um, ancient Chinese warlord flexing on a chariot, but people flexing their nuclear arsenals or the effectiveness of the F-35 fighter, even though it's not that practical, right? But then there's economic threat. And we looked at that mainly through sanctions and their processes. Sanctions being such an interesting case when we study threat because sanctions don't work, but the threat of sanctions tends to work. And that's the utility of threat. You don't have to commit resources to something. Going back to the example of the Chihuahua, he doesn't have to commit to an attack most of the time if he's going to bare his teeth. The monkey doesn't have to commit to an attack if he beats his chest and starts screaming. So yeah, threat, massively important tool in U.S. foreign policy processes. Just the other big lesson with sanctions, of course, is something that's mostly a threat shouldn't be done in response to something. So Russian invasion of Ukraine, communist revolution in Cuba, stuff like that. it's not going to be as effective, and it's going to artificially increase prices, but it's going to make the leadership look more powerful. And since they're the ones controlling it, sanctions are probably never going away. So as per usual, questions or comments, shoot me an email. I hope you guys have a great weekend. See ya.